Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. If you are listening for the first time, I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of hardcore IT security, IT business leadership, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and fearless living principles. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, everybody. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. If you are returning, that's awesome. I love it, and I'm so grateful that you're listening again. If you are brand new, you're going to love this because I've been asking myself a question recently. What makes a world-class innovation lab? Like, who's really executing on innovation? And I found Eric to come in and talk to me about Experian's innovation data labs. It's the first time we've had someone on the show who runs a major innovation lab. So I'm excited to bring to you this conversation that you can be a fly in the wall listening to. Eric has global responsibility for R&D with an emphasis in extracting value from first-party data and the development of new products and services across all business units and geographies. He's been pioneering the application of advanced analytics and machine learning in credit, fraud, mobile, payments, social media, digital advertising, and healthcare. And he manages labs in North America, UK, and Brazil. My conversation is going to give you a window and a visibility into several areas as Eric and I talk. First of all is why he thinks ruthless competency wins. It's interesting. Number two is innovation is more powerful when linked to a higher purpose. We get into this part a little bit later in the conversation, but I was really intrigued to hear that because I think it links to this higher transformative purpose, I think is super important for innovation moving forward. Also, managing an innovation portfolio and developing intellectual property comes out of these efforts. So he talks about this. In addition, the organization structure he reports to, the culture of Experian, not only from the types of people culturally he hires and what type of culture they work in, but also the culture of Experian and what their expectations are of the innovation lab as a business unit that supports other business units. We also get a little bit technical and talk about LDA and machine learning techniques. And we talked about unsupervised and supervised machine learning. I think this is interesting. And I think if you're interested in innovation, you've got to understand the types of machine learning so that you know how to manage and what types of people you're looking for. And I'm also trying to do something a little different with the show and get some direct feedback from you, from my listeners. It can be the Sahara Desert for me without feedback. So I'd love for you to step out of the shadows and engage with me. My cell number is 410-320-6433. Text me, call me. Let me know the guests you want to see on the show, people that I would be inspired to interview if I knew about them, if I knew that you knew that there was some great people in business information, technology, leadership, enterprise IT security, exponential tech, innovation, personal development, human performance, etc. You guys know the type of guests I love to have in the show. So basically, any top person who expands learning about the possibilities for the business information leader. If you prefer to go back and forth with me via email, that's great as well. I'm at billm@redzonetech.net, or you can reach me on Twitter at EXOITleader, at EXOITleader. Now, let's get into my discussion with Eric Haller. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
So as I was reading a lot of the articles that have been written about you and Experian and the Innovation Lab, can you give just an overview of what in your mind is, by definition, an innovation lab?
Well, it's funny because as soon as you asked that, I was in an executive meeting, I want to say about 3 weeks ago, and somebody asked me for my, these are the guys that run the company, and they asked me what are my thoughts on innovation. And I said, it's funny because in our lab, we never even say the word innovation. I think it's more the kind of in the DNA of what you do. You look at the world and you think pretty much anything could be improved. It's a kind of almost a culture of looking at things around you and saying, gosh, this really ticks me off, or well, I wish we could do this, or I don't understand why this can't happen. And then putting, some, we'll say, mental muscle behind it to try to figure out how to change the situation. And I think, so if I were to say innovation lab, which, we're a lab here comprised of mostly scientists and engineers, I think that's exactly what we're doing. We're looking at the world around us, the one that our company Experian plays in, and we just see lots of opportunities to do good things with the data that runs through our business and the data that runs through our clients.
How did you happen to grow into this position within the organization? What has been your steps to get to the point you're at right now with Experian?
Well, my background coming to Experian was a bit diverse. I've been working in product development and startups and marketing for basically my entire career, which is, I'm embarrassed to say, something like 20, we'll say more than 20 years. We'll just leave it at that. I'm a two-termer at Experian. I was here in the 90s and worked on M&A and strategic alliances. And I left to start my own company, which focused on ID fraud, which I sold. It was called ID Analytics. It became part of LifeLock, and LifeLock, if you read the press, just got bought by Symantec for $2.4 billion. But I left to do a startup and did some other things, and then I got recruited back in, and this time it was to run a product P&L, and I managed, it was about a $500 million P&L here at the company, and realized that it was very hard to develop things organically that were kind of swing for the fences type product opportunities. In a rigid P&L environment where you're delivering metrics, KPIs that you've committed to with the management and your investors, taking risks become a bit more challenging. You have to figure out creative ways on how to squirrel away the right resources to take those risks. And I felt the Experian that we could be doing a lot more. So I think the company, I did have a lot of trust with our executive team based on a lot of the things that I had done in the past, but really, I'd never started up a lab from scratch. I'd never managed a team of scientists ever before. I had managed software engineers before, but never scientists. And I just pitched it internally, this notion, and told them what I wanted to do, how much money it would cost the company, and what they could expect from it over a few years, and they funded it. So I guess you could say I'm lucky that way. I didn't have a resume that said, hey, Eric's got a track record of standing up labs. That wasn't it at all. It's the first time I've ever done something like this.
Does your background as an entrepreneur, does that help?
I think it helped a lot, actually. Yeah. I mean, once you've been in the business of tackling something, it's an idea, you come up with a way to solve for it, you realize how much execution plays a big factor in it. And that's kind of the way I personally tackled the lab. I'm not a scientist or an engineer myself, but if you look at my whiteboard, the first week that we started up the lab, we had a team meeting and we talked about what would it take to be successful. And we came up with these three words: Ruthless Competency Wins. And which is ironic because we're talking about innovation, but we all believe that the world's not short on ideas. We see problems around us all the time. We see a lot of different ways to solve those problems, but inevitably it comes down to, getting the best people against it and executing on it. So I think if you come from a startup environment, that you totally get it. That's kind of we'll say, one of the big pieces of the recipe to success. And that's what we've tried to replicate here in the lab.
Who do you have to partner with within your organization? Are you on the edge, on the fringe, sort of self-funded? Or do you have to engage with CIO or CTO or other business units?
So, one thing is very helpful is I actually report to our global chief operating officer. So the way Experian is organized, we have 4 regional chief executive officers, and each regional CEO manages all the people in that region. And we have 17,000 people. So the person that manages our North America region manages about 6,000 people. All of those CEOs report to our global chief operating officer. And I shared the same manager as all the other CEOs. So for me, that's made it a bit, I'll say, easier to get traction because those CEOs control all the resources within their region. So when I do run into hiccups or whatever, we can sit down and say, hey, is this worth trying to plow a new field for, or should we take a different direction? But if you peel back the onion, I would say that we've had to be in a position to work with a lot of different people across the organization: business unit presidents, sales teams, product and marketing teams, everything from sourcing new ideas, which a lot comes from the market, but we also get a lot from our business units, to once we've built something, we've incubated it, and now we need to return it back to the business. We need to be in sync with those product management teams, those development teams. And then, of course, with sales, our sales quotas are prioritized based on the business units. So for us to get sales bandwidth, we need to make sure the business units have bought in so they can provision us that space. We'll say sales bandwidth.
Do you have to interview clients as well? I mean, are you?
We do spend a lot of time with clients. Yeah, that's actually where we probably get the most traction. So we'll say we've been doing this now for 6 years. We've got labs now in 3 countries. So we've got one here in North America, one in London, and one in Sao Paulo. And so the notion there is that when the sales team is engaged with clients, I mean, with a CMO, a CRO, CEO, and they start to have that, we'll say, strategic dialogue about where that company is going, what are the major hurdles that they're going to have to tackle and wrestle with to make their numbers for the year, that's typically when they'll pull us in. And so we are a part of that conversation, and we can listen to, we'll say, what are the highest priority strategic objectives, and then come back to the shop and think through it and see, is that something that we can engage the client with? Can we come back to them with something they'll want to partner with us on it to swing at trying to solve for whatever that issue might be?
Oh, interesting. So, and is it typically around data and finding and mining really useful information from data as far as a product that you're looking to develop would be concerned?
It is. Yeah. That's actually why we call them data labs. So, we're not, maybe in that respect, I don't see too many folks coining the name of their labs data labs, but we are all about data. So it's not infrequent for a client to pass billions and billions of transactions to us so we can, evaluate that. We'll merge it with our data. Experian has, we set on a lot of information ourselves that drive the businesses that we operate. And we do that all in our own computational environment that is dedicated to our labs.
What's the most common misconception? You must have people reaching out to you just even to kind of understand how they can do it themselves in their organization. What's the most common question you hear people ask?
Believe it or not, they're typically not technical questions. I think about, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we would get questions like, gee, you operate a Hadoop cluster. What were the benefits that, you saw in going from mainframe to Hadoop or something like that? And I would say 3 or 4 years ago, it was much more common to get a question like that. But now most of the questions are, how in the heck are you able to attract the type of talent that you are attracting into your lab? Because right now, that's probably the single greatest hurdle that most large companies are facing in the data and analytics space, attracting the right talent to put against the opportunities.
Do you find that it's possible for a company to rent that expertise? Like, have you thought about coming up with a rental model where people can patch in and sort of like turning into an IBM Watson, so to speak, of the capabilities you have?
It's a cool idea. I don't think we would be interested in something like that. Our business model here for the lab is really focused on developing intellectual property. And so, just hearing the term rent makes me think that, intellectual property is most likely to be owned by, whoever's doing the renting, not the person that's being rented or the company that's being rented. And so, I think that would be kind of the question mark in my mind, is how do you wrestle through that? Because when we develop IP, the notion is that we're building a product that we can take out across the market.
That's really important point. So the Data Innovation Lab is really one of the primary objectives you're looking for is to develop IP based on these unique capabilities you're building to help help your customers.
That's right. So it becomes that funnel for new product development for the rest of the company.
And is it something that you try to scale? Like if you solve it for one client with this unique capability, then you're looking to scale that across your portfolio? Or is it something that you just try to deliver to that one particular customer?
If it was, yeah, that's actually an excellent question, and I certainly wasn't clear on that. So we are very selective about what we go after, and the reason why is because the end game is developing IP for products that we're going to put across the market. We are looking at these opportunities with that lens. So we're looking at two things primarily: the probability that we'll be successful, because we are operating on that, we'll say, fringe. And well, we might get that adrenaline rush of, chasing after somebody that nobody's been able to solve before. We really have to have a line of sight to a finish line. So we typically don't take, we'll say, broad discovery type opportunities unless we think that the discovery might yield some treasures along the way. So we look at that. We also look at the magnitude of impact. So we want to see something that's going to be a needle mover. It's nice to hit singles with products, but in a company that does close to $5 billion in revenue, we're making the investments in labs to make sure that we can build things that, could fuel top line growth for our business. So we talk to a lot of clients, and I'm not going to say that the client, quote unquote, wins the lotto when we decide to choose something to work on, but it is a bit of that, because a lot of times we're doing the investment in developing whatever that product is. So if we're building something with the client, they don't have to participate in the financial risk of developing something from scratch. So we'll take that risk on ourselves. And if we're successful and we build something that solves a problem, they want to use it, then they can certainly license it. And, that's good for us. It's good for them. But really, that's what we mean when we say risk-free environment. Like, we talk about that a lot with clients. We'll talk about the fact that, our computational environment's completely cut off from the rest of the world, so you don't have to worry about somebody networking in and going after the data that's inside it. We don't operate with personally identifiable information, so when they do actually get to it, there's no, security numbers and names and addresses and things that can be toxic if they're compromised. And they don't have to worry about being, participating in that financial risk. So we're doing this all on our own dime. But then, of course, we own the intellectual property that we developed, and so far that model's worked. I think if I hung a shingle out and said, "Hey, you can rent our resources," I probably could charge pretty good rates, because I think they'd be like, "Wow, that's great." But it wouldn't be good for Experian. Like, I think we get way more out of the investment by generating the IP and building new products than we would renting ourselves out.
But I think a lot of the people listening sort of are going to be more resource constrained. So I want you to talk about, if you were in a constrained environment, maybe in a company that had 500 or 5,000 employees, how you would approach innovation from that angle. But before we get into that, you must, though, to reduce risk on what you chase after, because you're so selective, you must have like a portfolio that you gauge risk on, like where you're going to be your home runs versus your singles. Do you have that visual for the team? And like, how do you determine which is going to be a home run versus a pure single? Or do you not look at it that way?
That's so funny. So yeah, I mean, if you look at my whiteboard right now, there's about 16 projects that are stacked in any given month. So we usually have, this is just for our North America lab. Then we have similar pipelines for Brazil and the UK. But yeah, actually this morning, it's funny that you brought that up, because this morning we were having a team meeting. I was meeting with the guys that manage delivery, and we were just kind of thinking to ourselves, when you're load balancing heads against these projects. So you're like, all right, where do I want to put our investment? We talked about where we thought the biggest hits might be in the market revenue wise. We're pretty fluid here. I mean, believe it or not, with a company where the business folks all have MBAs and, the scientists all have PhDs, you'd think we'd have a lot of structure around business cases and those types of things. We don't. Everything's whiteboarded out, conversational. I'd much rather have an hour whiteboard session on a business opportunity than reading a 16 or 20 page business case. I've always had the philosophy that to write the business case, you had to think through a lot of things. You already knew what the answer was, and you're spending most of your time trying to justify it. I think you could get through a lot of that with a pretty serious dialogue, and we all believe in that. But yeah, that's exactly what we do. We have a portfolio. We look at the risks associated with it, the potential returns, and if we think we're putting time into something and it's looking worse and worse, as the weeks go by, like this was a real dog, then then we shut it down and we go back and we talk with whoever we need to do that. But typically, I would say the success rate is actually pretty high. If it makes it to the board and we're actually putting resources against it, probably close to half of these wind up generating revenue for the company.
Interesting. So is the key to that being in front of the customer, just to seeing and measuring what they're trying to solve? Or how do you...
You have to be tight with the market. Just so if you were, I did manage more on the product side and we'll say the business side, but if you're trying to size a market, you're going to spend a lot of time with clients. You're going to spend some time maybe with some guys that are researching the market and defining market sizes. But we do spend a lot of time with clients. And as far as defining the market, we ping we'll go and communicate with our business unit colleagues when it makes sense if we need to get some more dimensions around the market. But about 20% of the lab are actually people with backgrounds in product development and consulting. So that's a lot of what they do. It's more on we'll say the business side of building products.
Do they tend to have that design thinking orientation, or is it more, what would be the skills of someone on that side of things versus the data scientist side?
Well, there aren't many.
Okay.
But those that we have, but those that we have, I want to say every single one of them went to graduate school. I'm not sure if they all have MBAs, but most of them do. They all have technical undergrads. And most of them spend time working in consulting. And maybe some of this is my own personal bias. I like hiring, we'll say smart consultants who, maybe spend some time at McKinsey or Accenture or Oliver Wyman or, one of the, BCG, because these are folks that they've had to engage with clients at a senior executive level. They're used to operating in an environment where they started with a blank sheet of paper and they had to put something together. They're used to thinking critically about how to solve for a problem. And in this case, I'm looking for individuals that have a tech background. So when they're working with our scientists, they're translating problems to a point where our scientists and engineers can engage to think through how to solve for it. Yeah, I would say that makes us a bit unique in the company because we have all those pieces together under one roof.
Do you try to, with the data scientists, are they typically versed in Hadoop and Python? And is there a certain type of product set that they come with, or they just have more of the analytic side of the computer science background at their disposal?
So Python and R and if they've worked in, some kind of MapReduce type environment. But I would say that, to get in as a scientist, we screen for their algorithm ability. So we give them tests that they have to take.
Okay.
And the tests actually will test them on their ability to solve for specific algorithms. It will test them on their coding ability. So we give them what we believe to be typical type coding assignments in the lab. When you're working with large data sets, how are you going to write a super efficient indexing piece of code? And so we'll give them the challenges that we always see. And then they can write their code in whatever language they choose. If they want to write pseudocode, that's fine too, although they probably get marked down for that. But then we score it. We score their coding ability. We score their algorithm ability. And that's just to be a data engineer. If they're going for a data scientist role, and if they don't have experience, say they're just coming out of school with their PhD, we'll typically give them a block of data that they get in 3 days. They have to clean it. They have to analyze it. They have to come up with their own techniques that they want to use, whether it's logistic regression scoring or some type of machine learning approach. And then they have to come back with what they've learned and present it to a room of about a dozen scientists and explain, the process that they took it through. And then typically on top of that, we'll have them present on like what they received their PhD in, so we can get a feel for, when they are an expert in something, how well do they articulate what they know. And then they go through almost a full day of interviews where it's usually 2 or 3 on 1 with a whiteboard, and they're given challenges that we would typically see in the lab, and we see how they, whiteboard out their solutions. So it's pretty grueling. I'd say the last 3 scientists that we hired, one has their PhD from MIT, another one has their PhD from Yale, and another one has their PhD from Princeton. So we definitely are pulling in what I'd say. That's not a requirement that you go to one of those schools. We really don't care. but those are the folks that are making it through the process.
I'm assuming the 3-on-1s are really looking for teamwork and collaboration. Is there a certain part of this are you just looking for heroes, or are you trying to see if they can participate in the dynamics of group collaboration, or is that not really that important with what you are trying to do?
It's definitely important. That's what I like to say. This kind of, we'll say this is at 50,000 feet.
Sure.
My mantra is we don't hire jerks. We have to live with these folks. Everybody that we work with, we see them all the time. We're in tough meetings where we're wrestling through stuff. There's lots of opinions. We try to be as fact-based as possible. We'll have debates over techniques. We'll have, debates over all sorts of things. But in the end, we all want to be able to hang out and enjoy each other's company. So we definitely are looking for humility in the process. I would tell you that we have definitely not hired people who have done well throughout the entire process, done exceptionally well, but that came with a lot of ego. And we just know that, day in, day out actually can be counterproductive. So we are looking for, when you say heroes, I say like superheroes. My take is everybody in this lab has a particular strength where they tend to be able to do whatever that is better than anybody else. And we do see that a lot. And we're always looking for that. Once we see somebody that brings, we'll say, because of what they did their doctorate work on or whatever, they have a perspective or a background or some technical acumen that we're lacking in the lab, and we see an opportunity to leverage it. That actually is a big plus.
Yeah, no, I was just listening to a podcast by, it'll pop into my head, but he talked about the concept of weak link sports like soccer. And this is so true. If like your right winger's weak, it doesn't matter if all 10 players are strong. If you have one weak link, it definitely, the other team can exploit that weakness versus the point of basketball is if you're playing basketball, you can really lean on, one or two stars, but it's very difficult on soccer. He called it a weak link sport. So I can see how, with the complexity and the amount of skills you need, how finding a strong and solid team would really make it much more effective for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, in this lab, the weakness might come in, I'll say it could come in youth, just from lack of experience. You get somebody that we do on occasion hire undergrads when they start just incredible. I actually hired one person who didn't even graduate from college, but he built his own Hadoop cluster in his garage. And it just so happened his brother had a PhD from Stanford and was working for Google, but he was like the rebellious little brother, but he was a genius. So, we grabbed him. But I tend to care less about the educational, we'll say, credentials. It just turns out that we wind up hiring some people with very impressive credentials.
One of your blog posts, you wrote about breakthrough experimentation and innovation. And I was curious, what experience or story that have you been most proud of with your team or the end deliverable to a customer that the most fits that breakthrough experimentation and innovation quote that I read?
Well, I have a few of them. I'm looking at my whiteboard. I'm like, what would I want to talk about? Well, there's a few. Maybe I'll talk about a couple of them. One, actually, there was one bank that was sitting on top of a lot of card transaction data on like 40 million customers. And they were like, we've got all this data, but we don't really have a good measurement or insight into how to leverage it. We know a lot of people are leveraging card transaction data, but we've seen all of those solutions. In fact, we actually buy some of them, and we still feel like we're leaving a lot of value on the table, but we just don't know what it is. So, they brought this up with us and basically said, well, if we gave you this data, what could you do with it? Amaze us. And so we came back and we came up with a whole bunch of different ideas, and we took what we thought to be the top three and went back to them with them. I'll kind of talk a little bit about that, which they got excited about and wound up saying, yes, let's do it. But one of them was, there's a lot of, we'll say, segmentation frameworks in marketing that, try to leverage like demographic data or geodemographic data so that you can use that for targeted marketing. The more information you can use up front to be able to segment out your market, the better response rates you'll likely get when you go to market to those individuals that are in those segments. So we said, what if you created spend behavior segments just based on the card transaction data? So the populations you'd be creating really are 100% reflective of their true actual card spend. What kind of results might you get in the market if you targeted, we'll say, somebody who only uses their card online? They're a heavy-duty online shopper. You see lots of transactions with Amazon or Apple. Maybe the types of transactions they're engaging in are on the online channel. And what if you chose to market to them only online? What if you offered them a product where they got discounts or some rebate back whenever they use their card online? What if you chose to email them their offers versus putting it in the mail? So you cater your offerings, you cater how you communicate with that customer based on how they use the card. So we said, okay, well, let's kind of chase that rabbit. And so we leveraged a topic discovery system called LDA. Well, it's a technique. It's an unsupervised machine learning technique. The same technique Google uses when you do a search. And we imagined that the card accounts were just like documents that Google would search. And the data within those accounts were just like words, like you would use for topic discovery and search for words within a document. And so we categorized all that spend into these segments, and we replayed that back. Now, we didn't know what we were going to get. I mean, that's the risk, right? We took this approach in unsupervised machine learning, approached it to, literally billions of credit card transactions on tens of millions of accounts, not knowing what the results would be. And when we dialed it in, we were blown away that the segments became so clear. So once the clusters were created, we actually went and looked at the clusters and said, wow, we could actually create marketing segments from these. And we went back to the bank, and now the bank uses those segments. We consistently recluster all of their accounts every month. They use those segments across all sorts of different ways that they market their products and communicate with their customers. And they're having huge success in how people are responding and using their card. So that's kind of what I think is breakthrough. Yeah.
Now,
I could talk about the other things, but they were just suck up all the time me talking about projects. But
no. I think it's important for people to hear the story, because I think otherwise it just becomes kind of theoretical. So I think that makes it come alive for myself as well. And what's interesting is the machine learning. When you say unsupervised, are you saying that you pointed the algorithm at the set of data? Did you give it instructions like look for this or look for that? Or did it have to try to build pattern that it found? Like, was it just completely unsupervised, or did you give it any sort of like head north, head south?
This is unsupervised. I'll tell you so the difference, maybe some of your listeners might be a little lost. So I'll just try to keep it super clear. So the difference between unsupervised and supervised is supervised is you have some known outcomes that you're trying to model for or look for. So if you think of like, hey, I've got a bunch of people that have an illness like cancer. So I know what cancer looks like. I know the symptoms. I know what symptoms they had before they were diagnosed with cancer. And now I've got, 100 million people. And I'm going to try to be really smart about trying to figure out who might have cancer and that they don't know it yet. So I have a known outcome that I'm actually modeling for, and I've got something that I can feed my process so it knows what that looks like. In unsupervised, you're really doing more like, I'll say, pattern recognition. You're looking at a lot of information. You don't really know what you're looking for, but you'll know when an anomaly creeps out. You'll know when, hey, I've never seen fraud before. I'll give you a perfect example. We had a large bank say, we've got all these great fraud detection systems for our card transactions. When we see fraud, we feed our systems what fraud looks like, and it is great at finding things that are similar. But in that environment, it's not so good at finding something that's come up that nobody's ever seen before.
Sure.
So for unsupervised, it's a perfect opportunity. So it's saying, you know what, most of the time I know, this looks pretty normal, but this spike comes up and I've never seen that before. For clustering or topic discovery, things where you're just looking to map for patterns, it's really good for that. And so maybe that's the best way to distinction.
I think it's interesting. I know the IT security world has to go that way as well, because there's so many 0 days issues that the systems have to start to learn. They absolutely have to start to learn for the unknown, something that breaks the pattern. So it's interesting how you're kind of using a similar technique.
Yeah. Actually, in cybersecurity, that's actually network security is actually a big project we're just starting to engage in. And if you think about for Experian, we've got data centers all over the world, and our clients, have the same issues that we do in terms of, protecting against attacks. And so we've got all this data running through our systems on attacks and how, that's coming in. And we said, gee, why don't we do this? Why don't we leverage our own data and see what we can do in terms of developing products or services that can not only detect intrusion or potential intrusion as it's occurring, but predict where it may come from next. And so we're actively working on that project using Experian as our internal client. And then as we get, knowledge and some success, we can turn around and go to market.
One of the biggest issues is and I was going to ask you this, is that, Styx and Taxi are using federal government data sources that don't talk to commercial enterprises. So the data that the public sector has, FBI and what have you, our DHS, they're not sharing that with the commercial sector, but it's there. So it's interesting if that data could be mapped, then all of a sudden you could see what our nation's defense can see and then marry that, suck and ingest that data into our commercial tools. Then all of a sudden you have almost like a biological model where we can respond, like the body doesn't have to think, oh, I've got a threat in my big toe. It's infected and it just deploys. And so it's interesting, your team could potentially deploy against that really tough challenge, which is unstructured data flowing from public, private, and figure out what the pattern is so that we can respond to security events.
Well, that sounds super interesting.
So,
yeah, that's exactly the kind of stuff we would like to work on.
Well, I know we didn't start this conversation to talk about that, but the parallels are totally related.
Oh yeah, no, that's right. I'll have to follow up on that one. Sounds good.
Well, listen, I really, really appreciate you coming on and educating myself and audience about what Experian's capabilities are, what you've developed with the data labs, and you definitely got my mind turning a bit, and I'm sure you did for our listeners as well. Is there anything that you were just dying to share with my listeners that we didn't get to that we could wrap up with?
Well, I don't, well, thanks for that. And thanks for the opportunity to just sit and talk for a little while. Yes, actually. So this is a little bit of a shameless plug. If any of your listeners are data scientists, which I don't know how many are, but we are always looking for those best and brightest out there. So if I said anything that is maybe spurred some interest, I would also say there's a certain level of purpose in what we do, in that, Experian operates in healthcare and auto and in credit. And so if you're interested in bringing credit to those who have no credit footprint in the market, stimulating the economy for those businesses that don't have a voice, helping hospitals with identifying patients that carry the most risk into being readmitted, and trying to figure out how to predict that and then what treatment strategies might work best and follow up. I mean, these are all things that, we consider to be, really good, noble purpose type projects, but can have tremendous impact in the market. So if there's anyone out there, I definitely would love to see their resumes coming in.
That's fantastic. I know we spent some time on kind of the type of people you're looking for, and I think for sure we'll put on the show notes a link. How would you prefer people talk to you through Twitter, LinkedIn? What's your preferred mode? Email?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's great. Either is good. We'll make sure we follow up and give you both.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting you mentioned purpose, because it's funny that I think from a leadership point of view, it's funny that the teams that you have working together, it's not just scientists. You have very smart business analysts and you have people really thinking about, the higher purpose around the data. And otherwise, I think, I was just in a conversation the other day and it was actually a university professor. He was really concerned that his people aren't wanting to study anything other than programming. And I objected to it because I really believe that to solve some of the world's biggest challenges, we're going to really need to look at the scope of problems, what we're willing to go after, and marshal teams of both really important data scientists and programmers, but also people that are interfacing with clients, customers, and seeing, what problems do we have that we can deploy against?
Yeah, you're right on the money. And that's how we've designed the lab. That's exactly it. We try to pull together all the pieces under one roof.
That's so cool.
It makes a big difference. Yeah.
Well, Eric, I appreciate you for your time today. Thank you very, very much. And we'll link up everything on the show notes so people can connect with you if they desire.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a great day.
Sure. You too. Bye-bye.
Well, that wraps up my conversation with Eric Holler with Experian Data Innovation Labs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with him. If this show was fun for you, if you learned a lot, please go to iTunes and leave a comment there. You can find link to iTunes on the app that you're using. You can get the app on the Droid, that's Stitcher. The app on your iPhone, of course, is built in, and you can click on the show banner, the pretty picture there, and it'll show you how to leave a comment. It's great to leave a comment because it helps the show ratings. It helps the show be found by other IT leaders, and some of the best people that I talk to, they want to know how many people listen to the show because they want to sell books and they want to get their word out and their message, and I can't blame them. So leave a comment. It really helps a lot, and it helps me bring the best quality people in that I can. So again, I appreciate you for your time, for your attention, and until next time, have a great day. So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.